Oh no, I think there have been many speakers having something to do with Israel over the years.
Just during the current, recent.
That may be. Oh, I don't know. Oh yeah, I wanted to see that. Well, our speaker tonight is from CIE. Watch out for your left foot there. You're close to the mandola. Oh, I've got it. I get this time.
Ruben, is this happening? Is it happening this Wednesday?
Yes.
Are you leading it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm both counts.
Okay. I am really sure.
Well, but you're doing some key things.
Yeah, those I got.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. With the shrimp. You didn't have to do that. So if you want to do this, you're doing it.
No. It's not just like
Okay. Well, I'm here to support you on that. Because enough people here doing it.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you for moving up. How beautiful. Oh, I love that.
One just wants to.
Confirmation of the.
Yeah. And it's 7:30, so I kind of feel like starting.
Is your guest here? Have you greeted him?
I don't think he's here.
Do you know what he looks like or who he is?
I don't know exactly what it is. Die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Sounds like Pink Floyd. Die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Let's wait just a moment until we get the ghosts out of the machine.
It's the reverberations of the universe. Exactly, that's the reverberations of the universe.
I know, it makes us feel kind of...
We're just going to hang out a minute.
Shabbat, Shabbat.
Exactly.
I know. Die, 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 yai, da, die, yai, die, 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 yai, da, die, yai, die, 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 da, die, yai, die, 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 da, die, yai, die, 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 da, die, 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 yai, da, die. Yai da 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 yai da da yai da 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 yai da 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 yai da 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 da.
I miss our echo.
I know. And with that, we should acknowledge. Thank you, Jonah. Can you all wave to Jonah in the back, who's helping us with Zoom today and.
Pinch hitting, actually, because
yeah, that's right.
last minute.
That's right. Abby was supposed to be here, and she's not feeling well. And I want to welcome you and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome to all of you to CBH. And I wonder, is there anyone here who's here for the first time?
Yay, welcome.
well-
Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah. That's wonderful. My name is Reuben Haller, and
I'm Mackenzie Wren.
and we're going to be your fearless leaders this evening. And I'm still looking for our guest speaker tonight. I don't think Dr. Scott is here, is he? He's not in the house yet. So we do expect him. He knows the address. He said he was walking here. He lives very close, so he won't be having any parking problems, as far as I know. So I have supported or co-led Shabbat services here, many with Mackenzie, with Rebecca, with groups of people up here. But I would say that it's been about 40 years since I led a Kabbalat Shabbat service. And I'm so grateful that Mackenzie, my partner, is here to lend support. But after 40 years, I could be a little bit rusty. So I may stumble through this a little bit, and I beg your support and pardon. So I'm going to ask all of you to be supportive co-leaders of our experience as we welcome Shabbat. 40 years ago, on the other side of the continent, I used to lead Shabbat services at San Francisco Hillel, where for a couple of years I was director of undergraduate activities, which Hillel, for those of you who may not know, is there to foster Jewish life on campus. San Francisco State was also my alma mater, or as I guess we say in Hebrew, my ima sheli. You could say that in Hebrew, alma mater. And before working at Hillel, I was a student at SF State, as I said, and when I went to Hillel, I was just absolutely enraptured by the music, and that sort of drew me into Jewish ritual. This is the only time I'm going to be talking for any extended period, so don't worry. And then we'll light the candles in a minute. before I was at Hillel. When I became a student at San Francisco State, where I got a couple of degrees, including a teaching degree, I became a staunch Zionist there. When I arrived there on campus in the mid-'80s as an undergraduate, there existed at that campus a well-organized, slanderous, hate-filled propaganda campaign against Israel. The campaign was not about dialogue or peacemaking or deep listening or understanding one another. Instead, it used slogans and lies to paint Israel as an evil aggressor and Palestinians as being oppressed victims. There was no room for gray. No gray. It was all black and white. I didn't know at that point much about Israel, but I figured it couldn't be like that. So what did I do? I did two things. I started learning, and I found a group of Jews. Way before I set foot in the Hillel, I found a small group of Jewish activist undergrads, and I joined their group. We were about a dozen people, more or less. We weren't affiliated with any organization. We didn't have a particular political stance, except we were Zionist Israel supporters. And what we did was, for a number of years, stand up for Israel on campus. What I saw on campus then is not so different from what I've seen on campuses around the United States in the past year. No possibility for gray or nuance or complexity. All black and white. Is Israel blameless? No. Are Palestinians blameless? No. What roles have the other 20-some-odd Arab countries played in all this? What happened to the millennia-old communities of Jews who lived all over the Middle East in Arab and Persian countries? The more I learned, the more complicated it became. But the hate I witnessed and experienced was a sobering lesson. There's a phrase in the Torah that always makes me smirk. And I'm sorry, but it does. And I guess we're not supposed to smirk when we read the Torah, but that's just what happens for me. This phrase is where God says that our people would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the beaches. Yeah, right. In actual fact, we Jews are a very precious commodity. There are so few of us. And with European Jewry basically disappeared, Israel and the US now account for about 90% of the Jews in the world. About 16 million people, fewer than there were in 1939. Not exactly stars in the sky, not that numerous, maybe just a very small constellation. And this brings me back to San Francisco Hillel, where, as an inexperienced staff person, I was asked to lead a Shabbat service, and I said, okay, what do I do? You know, I really didn't know anything about it, but I came to love doing it. This past week, San Francisco Hillel, which for about 4 or 5 years was sort of a home away from home for me, was vandalized with spray paint, and the perpetrators tried to break in as well. It got very personal for me. This hate doesn't go away. As always, we are few, but we are strong, and we're stronger for having a Jewish state, resolved to defend ourselves, because history has proven that no one else will. So now I'm all tense. I don't know about you, as we greet the Sabbath and try to release some of these things, and hopefully our speaker will show up to educate us a little bit more about Israel. Let's just take a big breath. We heard in Mindful Moments this week, Rabbi Nachman expressing the value of the Jewish sigh. Oi, that's right. Oi.
Yeah, and he says how precious is the sigh of the Jewish people, and the idea of like an open mouth and a sigh and a sound. So just go ahead and sigh out the energies of the week, the energies of this arc for you. So just let's hear your sound of
Again.
Right? Maybe it's an oi, maybe it's an ah. Just make the sound that you need to sigh out. Yeah. It is a time of great sighing for so many of us. And so let's take one more big deep breath in. And the sweetness is that we arrive here for Shabbat to be together in holy community, to gather as Jews, no matter our politics, no matter our perspectives. We come together to pray these holy prayers, to sing the holy songs, and to keep alive the traditions that are so old, and to continue adding our voices to all of this incredible rich body of experience. So I want to invite us to just go back to our nigun for just a moment. So if you'll...
Die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. 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 Die, die, die.
To see my light in your light, basking in your grace, my heart's desire is to harmonize with yours. Do not conceal your pity, hide not that light of yours. Perhaps the you is spirit, perhaps the you is yourself, perhaps the you is all of us together. And so as we move into Yedid Nefesh on page 7 and 9, Hebrew on 7 and transliteration on 9, let us bask in each other's light as we lift our voices together.
Yedid Nefesh av harachaman, Yedid Nefesh av harachaman, Eshok avdecha, El retzonecha, Meshok avdecha, La da 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 el retzonecha Yarutz avdecha emoya Yishtachaver da 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 el mul
Give all pain surcease. Your presence on this earth plane do make known to us, and we shall respond then with song and with dance. Rush, my love, be quick. The time for love has come. Let your gentle favor grace us of old.
We'd like to invite Craig Gilbert to come and light our Shabbat candles tonight.
Let us bring in the light.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'etzivanu lehadlik ner, lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
We look at the light, and I want to invite you also to turn to each other and look at the light reflected in your own eyes, and go ahead and greet each other. Say hello, say Shabbat Shalom, introduce yourself to someone if you don't know. Hello, Zoomies, nice to see you. Hi, hi, hi. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom all. And it's our minhag, somehow over the years it evolved in our household, to take a little bit of that light and to put it on ourselves. So take a little bit of light and put it on yourselves. Take a little bit of light and put it on your neighbor, on each other. And then take a little light. This one's special. Take a little bit of light and then think about someone who may not be here. Maybe they're far away, I don't know. And throw some of that light their direction.
And of course, we lift up that light to the entirety of the world.
That's right.
Little beams of light. There it is. Speaking of little beams of light, especially this week with the angels moving up and down the ladders and wrestling and all of this talk of angels, let's welcome some angels.
On page 12 with Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Sharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Sharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Malachim the Shalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Elyon Mimelech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Baruch Hu Nil Shalom Malachei Shalom Malachei Elyon Mimelech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Baruch Hu Nil Shalom Malachei Shalom Malachei Elyon Mimelech Malachei Hamlachim Kadosh Baruch Hu Sechem L'Shalom Malachei Shalom Malachei Elyon Mimelech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Feel those angels marching up and down your
spine. Those are some rousing angels.
Some rousing angels.
And we turn to page 25 for Shiru Ladonai. A new song.
It's an old song, it's a new song.
Sung in a new way.
Exactly.
It's like the water in a river. It's never the same. Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru miyom, Yom Yeshuato, Yai Dai Dai, Yai Dai Dai, Yai Dai Dai Dai, Dai Dai Dai. Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru miyom leyom, Shu Yeshuato. Dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, dai dai dai, dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai
As we move in through this time of just like, letting the week just kind of like drop off as we sing and we release and we greet the Sabbath bride. And we think about where is the strength, where is the light. And so we think about light beams seated for the righteous and happiness for the steadfast of heart as we turn to Or Zarua on page 31. Sure. Or
Zarua la tzadik ul Yisrael simcha. Or Zarua la tzadik u'yisrael simcha. Or zarua tzadik u'yisrael simcha. Or zarua tzadik u'yisrael simcha. Bam diddy bam 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 Or zarua tzadik u'yisrael simcha. Or zarua tzadik u'yisrael simcha. Please turn to page 49. Tov lehodot.
Tov lehodot l'Adonai uzamer l'shimcha elyon להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות. יא ידדי, יא ידדי, יא ידדי, יא ידדי, יא ידדי, יא ידדי, יא טוב להודות לאדוני וזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות. Page 55. Yigdal v'yikdash shmei Rabbam Be'elmadi. Wait, sorry, no. Oh, sorry, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, y'all. Okay, yeah, the Hatzi Kaddish. Okay, we stand and face the Torah. We stand and face the Torah.
Is this a little loud?
No, it's good. This is the joy of lay leadership. If we need to do something, tell us. And that's all of us, right? Like, y'all, don't forget to stand up. It's good. Oh, we just completely skipped over. Yeah, no, it's Leilachat. Thank you for that. Lechadodi, y'all, we do need to bring in Shabbat. And
This is one bride that we do not want to leave
hanging at the altar. Thanks, y'all. See, it takes a community to run a Shabbat service. Page 41 and so on and so on.
Just one moment. Thank you.
Like what? What's happening? Yeah, we stand at the end. You may sit for now, and then we'll stand at the end. And we'll start on page 41.
You know, We were on the same wavelength. We missed it together. It makes me wonder at home what we might be missing. You know?
Okay, what tune are we doing? Lechadodi likrakala yadada 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 tene Shabbat nekavela lechadodi likrakala yadada 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 tene Shabbat nekavela
Shamor v'chazor b'dibor echad tishmianu El HaMiuchad Adonai Echad U'Shemo Echad L'Shem U'Tiferet V'Tehila Hey Lechadodi Lichakala Yadada 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 P'nei Shabbat Nekavela Lechadodi Lichakala Yadada 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 P'nei Shabbat Nekavela 42 Likrat Shabbat Lechu v'nelecha Ki mekor ha'brecha Merosh mikedem nesucha Sof ma'aseh v'machshava tila Hey lechadodi lichakala Yadada 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 P'nei Shabbat Nekavela lechadodi lichakala Yadada 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 P'nei Shabbat Nekavela Page 45 Hitoreri Kiva orek Uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai alai nikra. Hey lechadodi lichakala, yadada 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 p'nei Shabbat nekavela. Lechadodi lichakala, yadada 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 p'nei Shabbat nekavela. 47 Yasmin husmo tifrotzi ve'et Adonai maritzi al yad ish ben partzi v'nismecha v'nadila Hey lechadodi lichakala yadada 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 p'nei Shabbat nekavela Lechadodi lichakala yadada 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 p'nei Shabbat nekavela. Please rise and face the door. Boi v'shalom ateret bala gam besimcha u'tzochala tok emunei Segula Boi chala Hey lechadodi lichakala Da 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 P'nei Shabbat Nekavela Lechadodi lichakala Da 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 P'nei Shabbat Shabbat Shalom. Well, okay. Okay, so we've done Tov Lechadot, and you're still standing, and that's a beautiful thing. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 55. And again, with gusto. Yigdal v'yitadash shemei Ravav. Amen.
Be'alma divrach yirutei v'amlik malhutei b'chayeh b'chol mekom uv'hayedeh kol beit Yisrael Bizman HaKariv, Ve'meru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevora, Le'alaya, Yitbarak, Vishtabak, Vitpar, Vitrumam, Vitnaseh, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shmei Kudasha, Rehu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbechata nehemata, Damiram le'alma, V'meru
Amen.
Yada, yada, Baruch et Adonai, Hamevorach, Hamevorach. Baruch Adonai, Hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Should we do it again? Is that-
Thank you. May be seated. Thank you. Is Lisa Barrios here? There she is. Right there. Up to you.
You can join me for a reading on page 759. It's called In Praise, Genesis 1:2. Hail the hand that scattered space with stars, wrapped whirling world in bright blue blanket, air, made worlds within worlds, elements in earth, souls within skins, every one a teeming universe, every tree a system of semantics, and pushed beyond probability to place consciousness on this cooling crust of burning rock. Oh, praise that hand, mind, heart, soul, power, or force that's so enclosed, separated, limited planets, trees, humans, yet breaks all bounds and borders to lavish on us light, love, life, this trembling glory.
Thank you. Elohe v'cheyam tamid yimlok aleinu v'leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai hamariv aravim.
Amen.
Please turn to page 63 or 61. Excuse me, 62. We'll go right in the middle there. And we'll read together. Just a moment. With everlasting love, you have loved the house of Israel. Torah and mitzvot, laws and justice you have taught us. And so, dear one, our God, when we lie down and when we rise, we reflect upon your laws. We take pleasure in your Torah's words and your mitzvot now and always. Truly, they are our life, our length of days. On them we meditate by day and night. Your love will never depart from us as long as worlds endure. Blessed are you, beloved one, who loves your people, Israel. We join our voices together on page 65 in the Shema and Ve'ahavta. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha Bechol levavcha uvechol nafshecha uvechol me'odecha V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha bevetecha uvlechtecha v'derech uvsholtecha uvkumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot beinenecha uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha.
As we're moving through this, you feel your body just really continuing to drop in and relax, surrounded by the beauty of these ancient words as we just welcome in, continue to welcome in the peace of Shabbat. We move into our Song of Liberation on page 79.
Micha mocha ve'elim Adonai, Micha mocha neder v'kodesh, Nora tehilo osef eleh, Adonai imlok leolam vahed, Adonai imlok leolam vahed, Adonai imlok leolam vahed, leolam vahed. Ya da da da, da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai Gal Yisrael. Ya da 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 ya da da. Miracles and wonders. We turn to page 81. I always linger on this image, on this page, this beautiful drawing. It could be Jerusalem. I guess it is Jerusalem. But I like to imagine people living in this drawing and living in dwellings all over. We pray for a Sukkot Shlomecha, a Sukkot of peace and protection over all peoples in every dwelling, in every city, in every village, in every place.
The bottom of on 83 has been so alive for me recently, where there's so much fear and so much worry and so many folks wrestling. It says, when fears multiply and danger threatens, when sickness comes, when death confronts us, it is the blessings of shalom that sustains us and upholds us. Let us truly take this moment in the sukkah of peace, this shalom together, know that it is partly because we gather in community. That is what sustains us. That is the blessing. It is us gathering again and again and again to wrestle with all of the complications and intricacies of this tradition.
Ufros aleinu Sukkot, Sukkot, Shelomecha, Sufros Aleinu, Sukkot, Sukkot, Shelomecha. We turn to page 85. Vishamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat
le'dorotam berit olam.
Vishamru
b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Sshabbat le'dorotam berit olam.
B'nei Reuven b'nei Israel, Oti le'olam, Oti le'olam, Oti le'olam. Vishamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, asa Adonai, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Vishamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashva'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. Vishamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. A weekly holiday. What a great idea. Let's rise for the Amidah, which you'll find on page 91. We'll go at our own pace, and when you're done with your personal prayer, please be seated. Adonai, Sifate Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Open my lips, beloved one, and let my mouth declare your praise. Thank you. Thank you all. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Scott Abramson from the Center for Israel Education. One wants to get one's prepositions right. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk at our shul. And I'm just going to get out of your way. And
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you. Shabbat shalom to you. So, 45 minutes or
3 hours.
3 hours? Yeah.
And can I get you some water?
No, I'm okay.
You sure?
Yeah. Now I can lecture or we can be more.
We have
Okay,
Zoomers.
yes.
We have Zoomers. So I'm in here. I'm going to help.
Okay. Yes. So my ambition is to have you get as much out of my being here as possible. So to that end, I'll defer to you if you'd like me to lecture on the topic of Zionism's origins and development, I can, or if you'd like to have a more interactive format, that's fine too.
Can you talk for a while?
Sure.
This is a congregation, I think, that chimes in when it feels like.
Okay. Well, if I touch on a concept or say a word that's unfamiliar, then please do speak up and I'll define it for you. Okay, so one of the most misunderstood concepts in public discourse today is Zionism, particularly since October 7th. Zionism has undergone what linguists call pejoration, the making of a word into a pejorative, right? And sometimes words undergo the opposite process. That's called melioration. For instance, the words impressionist, suffragette, queer all began as derogations, but were reclaimed by those to whom they were applied. And thereby, you could say, emptied of the sting. Zionism is more often than not, I would say, spoken of as if it is something obscene, something scandalous or filthy even, squalid. This is the result of a process that began with the Soviet Union in the 1960s. The Soviet Union, oddly enough, had supported Zionism in the 40s and the creation of a Jewish state. But in 1950, when Israel aligned itself with the US on the western side of the Cold War, the falling out between Israel and the Soviets proceeded apace. And by the mid-50s, they were enemies. In the 60s, the Soviets launched something they called Zionology, which was the pseudoscientific study of Zionism. That's sort of a euphemism. Really what it was an academic way of vilifying Zionism. And they propagated this demonic view of Zionism, right? This view of Zionism as colonialism or imperialism or racism throughout the world, particularly the Third World. And the result was in 1975, the United Nations adopted the famous or infamous Zionism is Racism resolution. So the Soviet efforts bore fruit very quickly. Ultimately, that resolution was repealed in the early 90s, but the damage had been done. Enough people throughout the world were persuaded, thanks to this doggedly pursued Soviet campaign, that Zionism was, in fact, all of those things: racism, colonialism, imperialism. Well, Zionism is simply Jewish nationalism. Specifically, it is the movement of the Jewish people to reestablish their homeland, to reestablish a state, rather, in their ancestral homeland. That's all it is. So it's a form of Jewish nationalism. Now, Zionism, as Herzl, the architect of political Zionism, wrote in his pamphlet, The Jewish State, Zionism is an ancient idea, right? The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the renewal or revival of Jewish statehood therein. It's an ancient idea. Herzl, you could say, secularized that idea. Herzl was an atheist. He had a Christmas tree in his home. He didn't believe in God. He didn't have his son circumcised. He knew no Jewish language. His Jewish education was scant. So he was a very improbable apostle of Jewish nationalism. But he always felt a keen attachment to the Jewish people. The popular misconception is that Herzl was converted to a Jewish identification with the Dreyfus Affair. So the Dreyfus Affair was the false accusation of a Jewish officer in the French army, false accusation that he had undertaken espionage in the service of the Germans, France's mortal enemy at the time. So Dreyfus was falsely accused of being a traitor to France. And he was tried and convicted, and in a very public spectacle, degraded, that's what they called it. That meant they stripped him of his medals and they broke his sword in a ceremonial fashion. This was a notorious scandal. Ultimately, Dreyfus was vindicated, and a number of sympathetic French intellectuals mounted a campaign to prove his innocence, and they prevailed. And Dreyfus was vindicated. But in the popular imagination, it's thought that Herzl was won over to being Jewish or was awakened to his Jewish identity by the Dreyfus Affair. That's in fact not the case. It was a culmination of several things that led him to conceive and become the foremost organizer of Zionism. So the process by which Zionism came about started in the early 19th century. Now, it's important to remember that if you were to sketch a social portrait of the Jewish people in Europe in the early 19th century, the portrait would show an isolated, insular, ghettoized people, not European in any meaningful sense of the word, by which I mean they lived by force of law in walled quarters of European cities called ghettos. Does anyone know when the first ghetto was established? Venice, yes. So in 1516, a section of the Italian city of Venice, then the city-state of Venice, where there had been an iron foundry. That's a workshop where metal casings were forged. A section of the city where there was an iron foundry, which in the Venetian language is the word ghetto, was designated a Jew-only zone, or rather, Jews were relegated to that section and they couldn't leave except with special permission. And the Venetian ghetto, established in 1516, became the template for Jewish residential organization for several hundred years. It was the innovation of the Nazis to restore Jewish ghettos, to put the Jews back in the ghettos from which they were liberated in the course of the 19th century. So at the beginning of the 19th century, Jews throughout the continent were ghettoized, isolated, cordoned off from their neighbors. They had very little consensual interaction with their non-Jewish neighbors. They didn't speak their language. The Jews followed their own calendar. They ate their own cuisine. They dressed differently. They had their own administrative councils. They lived more or less in states within states. And if ever they interacted with non-Jews, it was when they were permitted to leave the precincts of the ghetto. But such interactions were unwelcome for the most part because of the unremitting hostility of their non-Jewish neighbors. And that hostility had been kindled by Christian anti-Semitism. Principally the accusation that Jews had killed God, deicide. But at the beginning of the 19th century, there converged several social processes that by the end of the 19th century had completely changed the condition of Jews throughout Europe. So one of those processes was secularization. So the Enlightenment of 18th century Europe celebrated reason and rationality and slighted or sometimes denigrated, in the case of Voltaire and Rousseau, religion. So Europe, particularly Western Europe, began to emerge from benighted Christian primitive prejudice and insularity. And Europe became much more cosmopolitan, much more scientifically minded, and much more tolerant, at least abstractly. And so the Enlightenment commenced this process of secularization. Another phenomenon that dawned around the same time as the Enlightenment was industrialization. So in the course of the 19th century, the factory system was introduced. Long-distance transport was revolutionized with the introduction of the steamship and the locomotive. Long-distance travel was for the first time possible. The world got a lot smaller, in other words. Now, the underside of industrialization was it caused unemployment for a great many people, right? So the prosperous textile workshop owner who presided over a team of workers who would produce hand-woven textiles was now driven out of business by automation, by mechanization, the factory system. So such people, these apprentices and workshop owners, were among the chief victims of this new economic order. And this brings us to a third phenomenon, what is known in Jewish history as emancipation. Now, if, say, the textile workshop owner was the chief victim of the new economic order, and it was to his detriment more than it was to anyone else's, the chief beneficiary of this new age in Europe was the Jew. And that's because in the course of the 19th century, something called emancipation unfolded. So emancipation was the process by which Jews throughout Europe were granted civil rights and citizenship for the first time. They were permitted to leave the unsanitary prison-like conditions of the ghetto. They were permitted to practice professions that had hitherto been foreclosed to them. They were able to integrate and acculturate in a way that they had never known. And so emancipation gave Jews really what the essence of freedom is, and that's choice. Right? When you have choice, freedom is choice of the individual, right? The opposite is the state has too many choices and the individual too few. So Jews had something they had never known before, and that was choice of where to live, of what professions to practice, of whom to fraternize with. And they responded to this choice in many different ways. And one way was Reform Judaism, which was an answer to the question of what should Jews do with this newfound freedom. The Reform movement tried to reconcile European culture with the Jewish heritage. The modern Orthodox movement tried to do the same thing, but it was much more leery of acculturation into Europe. The ultra-Orthodox Jews were the Jews who acted as if nothing had happened, right? They clung to the old way of life as if emancipation and the choices it brought with it had never come about. The Jewish communists and socialists, like Marx, turned to atheism and found in socialism a kind of quasi-religion. Same with Trotsky a little bit later. There were very different ways that Jews answered this question of how should we embrace or hold aloof from the freedoms we've been granted. Now, if you look at some of the most prominent Jews of the late 19th and early 20th century, you can see in their genealogy emancipation playing out. So take Freud, for example. Freud was an atheist, learned in Jewish matters, but an atheist. He was the grandson of a Hasidic rabbi. Marx descended from a long line of rabbis in a particular German city. Einstein's grandparents were devout Jews. Really, every Jewish secularist or atheist, grandparents or great-grandparents or parents, were like the ultra-Orthodox at one point. And so you can see this process in their family tree of secularization, or maybe an alienation from their Jewish roots. But that's not to say Einstein was a disaffected Jew or he strayed from his roots. He was an agnostic. He wasn't a believer in the conventional sense. Freud was an atheist, but still very Jewish sentimentally and intellectually. So emancipation was a gradual process that unfolded unevenly throughout the continent. It began in France in the 1790s and continued throughout Europe, ultimately ending in the 1930s when the Jews of Spain were granted citizenship. So it was a century-and-a-half long process. It was a process in fits and starts. Sometimes the Jews would be granted civil rights, only to see those rights rescinded years later when a new ruler took power. But for the most part, emancipation proceeded in a forward march. There were reversals, but there can be no doubt that Jews at the end of the 19th century were vastly better off than they were at the beginning. I mean, it's hard to overstate the degree to which the Jewish condition improved. Here you may have thought of parallels with the Black American experience, right? What happened after 1865? Reconstruction. And as W.E.B. Du Bois said, Reconstruction was a 12-year period during which the slave stood in the sun for a moment, only to move back towards slavery. So Reconstruction was that 12-year period during which There were some 1,500 elected black officials throughout the South, 2 black senators. It was a period of hope and promise and expectation that a better day was on the horizon. But in 1877, all of that came crashing down when the troops were withdrawn from the South and Reconstruction effectively ended, inaugurating what some historians call redemption from the Southern bigoted perspective, redeeming what had been taken, they felt. So the Jewish experience was similar insofar as emancipation, for all its promise and all the gifts it bestowed on European Jewry, was not an unqualified success. Because toward the end of the century, the 19th century, the storm clouds were gathering on the horizon for the Jewish people. There were ominous signs that the promise of emancipation was a false one. Some more assimilated Jews chose not to think about this because it was too distressing. Some, like those who became Zionists, looked squarely at the state of affairs and concluded that the Jews had no future in Europe, that Europe was a slaughterhouse. And one thing that it has to be said of the early Zionist thinkers was they were extremely prescient. They wrote of this, it was as if they could register the foreshocks of an impending catastrophe. And that catastrophe, of course, came in the 30s and 40s. But as the 19th century advanced, emancipation started to seem increasingly fragile. There were calls in France, for instance, to roll back some of the freedoms that Jews had enjoyed for a century. The mayor of Vienna in 1895 was Karl Lueger, who was one of Hitler's heroes, who was a ferocious anti-Semite, who spoke like a Nazi before the Nazi Party was founded. So the Jews had much cause for concern. Now, around the same time that Jews were being emancipated, whether fully or partly, a wave of nationalist excitement overtook Europe. And nationalism is based on the proposition that a nation should have in political form well, I'll put it to you this way. If a nation is a people, nationalism is their movement, and the nation state is the political expression of their nationhood, right? So if a people exists at the social level, if a nation exists at a social level, then the nation state exists at the political level. It's the political reflection of a nationhood, okay? So nationalism called for the establishment of a nation state for Europe's various nations. And by nation, I mean people, or what we would call ethnicity, or what used to be called race, right? England was the land of 4 races, right? The Welsh, Scottish, Irish, and English. Race had a different meaning before the 1930s. So nationalism held that the only just and natural condition for a nation was to have its own nation state. So to that end, Greece, which had been under the rule of the Ottoman Empire, fought a war of independence against the Ottoman government and became independent in 1832. Italy, which didn't exist as a unified country, but rather as an agglomeration of city-states, entered into existence in the early 1860s. And all those various city-states, like Venice, amalgamated to form one new country called Italy. Same with Germany. Germany didn't exist. There were German principalities and kingdoms like Prussia. But in 1871, about 36 of those German statelets fused into the new country of Germany. And so the Jews looked at this process, particularly the Jews who despaired of the promise of emancipation, and thought these peoples are not ancient like we are. They're not as glorious as we are. Why shouldn't we have our own nation? So that was the idea. But what really gave impetus to this idea was when the Germans, the Poles, the Greeks told their Jewish neighbors that they weren't a part of their nation because they were aliens. They didn't spring from the native soil of Germany. Their grandparents or even ancestors going back centuries came to the country as foreigners. They weren't indigenous, okay? And therefore, no Jew could claim with a straight face, this was as far as a non-Jewish German was concerned, that he or she was a true German. A Jew was a kind of sham German, right? A fraudulent German. Similarly, a Jew could not call himself a Pole. Why? Because a Jew wasn't a Slav like a Pole, wasn't a Roman Catholic and a Slav. And so the underside of nationalism is chauvinism or xenophobia, right? And chauvinism and xenophobia asserted themselves in full vigor in the latter half of the 19th century. So the Jews felt if they're going to be called foreigners, or rather if the Zionists thought, those who became the Zionists thought, if we're going to be called foreigners, if we're going to be told that we're not Germans or Poles and we're perpetual aliens, then we might as well return to the one place in the world where we are indigenous, and that's the land of Israel. And so as the 19th century drew to its end, a number of Zionist thinkers began cropping up throughout the continent. Most of them had once been full-fledged believers in the promise of emancipation. But something happened, a massacre of Jews, the reversal of Jewish rights somewhere, a blood libel. Something disenchanted them and sobered them to the reality that emancipation was not all that it was hoped would be. And so the Zionists were really, to put it unflatteringly, the pessimists among the Jews of Europe, because they despaired of the Jewish future in Europe. And they gave up. The assimilated Jews called them defeatists, called them pessimists. They saw themselves as realists. And whatever one thinks of Zionism, they happen to be right, because they did diagnose the condition of European, they did diagnose the pathology of European anti-Semitism. They concluded that it was ineradicable, and they felt that the only cure was to revive Jewish statehood in the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and to achieve self-determination in the cradle of Jewish peoplehood, the land of Israel. And so, as you can see, Zionism was the result of several processes that unfolded in parallel throughout 19th century Europe. And Herzl, or even the ableist There were other Zionists who were much better thinkers and writers and spokesmen. But Herzl's genius lay in marketing, organizing, and publicity. And he forged Zionism into a coherent institutional movement. And in 1897, when he convened the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, he confided to his diary, "I've just founded the Jewish state. If I say this out loud, people will laugh at me. And maybe they'll laugh at me in 5 years. But in 50 years, I'll be proven right." And exactly 50 years later, the United Nations adopted a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state. 50 years exactly after Herzl's diary entry in 1897. So to call Herzl the prophet of Zionism is not really to be metaphorical or figurative. He merits that designation, I think.
Thank you.
Sure.
I would love to open this up for questions. Then we're going to have just a little bit more service and Dormisha Bera, and then we'll have the donate after that. But please, you welcome some questions?
Yes.
2 quick questions, please. First, your academic affiliations. I regret that I didn't hear much of an introduction, and I conclude from your eloquence and the informative delivery that we just witnessed that you're probably a classroom professor. And if you would first tell me the answer.
Yeah, I taught at Northwestern until, let me see, September of 2023. So a month before October 7th. So I got out in time. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't teach anymore. So I can't say that I'll never be behind the lectern in a college classroom again. I'm just taking a break. Yeah.
And I have one question that applies to independent Israeli. I have one question that applies, thanks, to the independence period.
Yes.
And that is, would you please address the kind of binary or extreme beliefs that exist about the mass refugee exodus of Arab Palestinians in the 1947, and I understand through the 1949 period. And the binary that I refer to is, and I know this is very simplistic, the accusation against Jews that the Jews drove them out, and on the other hand, the belief or claim that all of these Palestinian Arabs just left for a while at the suggestion or order of various sheiks and kings, and, somewhere in the middle, tell us the truth.
You're right, it is somewhere in the middle. The traditional Israeli claim until the 1980s was that the displacement of 700,000 Palestinians in the first Arab-Israeli war was entirely voluntary, right? That the Palestinians left at the urging of their leaders. Specifically, they were told in radio transmissions broadcast from neighboring countries to pack up and leave and to return once the Jews had been driven into the sea. So that's the classical Israeli claim. Few subscribe to that today. Since the 1980s, that the traditional account, the sanitized account, we'll just call it the false account, has been disproven. And it happened in the 80s because there's a 30-year declassification rule in Israel that says documents after 30 years have to be unsealed. So that's why it happened in the 80s and not earlier, or later for that matter. The opposite claim is that the displacement of Palestinians in 47 through 49 was the result of a deliberate genocidal campaign of the newborn state of Israel that was aimed at ridding the country through ethnic cleansing of its Palestinian population. Now, neither is true. But it is true that 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. The question is how? And the answer is there were expulsions. Now, there were cases when Israeli soldiers would go into a village and forcibly evict the residents. It happened on several occasions, but it didn't happen to the majority of the refugees. The majority of the refugees fled to remove themselves from harm's way, simply because when your village is embattled and bullets are firing, it's natural to remove yourself from harm's way, to leave whatever direction you can and seek shelter. Now, does that make it moral? I'm not going to moralize to you. But that's just what happened. You can draw conclusions about the ethics of it yourself. Any questions about the refugee crisis? Where they went, how many, so forth?
I have a question about that, if I may.
Sure.
And first of all, apologies for a less than stellar introduction. I'm
fine with that. Really?
In my mind, I've often found an equivalence, or at least a moral justification for this displacement of the Arab population of Eretz Israel with the subsequent displacement in all the Arab lands of Jews who'd lived there for millennia.
Yeah.
And that's been,
Sure.
I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Notice I use the word displacement advisedly because I don't want to say expulsion because it wasn't an expulsion in every case. In fact, in most cases it wasn't. And I don't want to say flight because there were expulsions. So I say displacement or uprooting. Now, the Palestinian refugee crisis, which dates from the 47 to 49 war, has a parallel Jewish refugee crisis. So the first Arab-Israeli war created 700,000 Palestinian refugees. At the time of the first Arab-Israeli war, there were a million Jews living in Arab and Muslim lands. Today, there are about 5,000. Now, were the Jews expelled in every case? No, but they were expelled in some cases. They were expelled from Iraq. They were expelled from Libya. But they also fled because their neighbors were attacking or massacring them. And it became untenable, it became suicidal for Jews in Arab countries to remain where their ancestors had been for millennia. And that's why Jews in Israel from Arab countries or descended from Jews from Arab countries tend to be the most right-wing in the population because they're bitter. They have this ill feeling toward the Arabs for what they or their grandparents or parents endured. I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm just explaining it. So there's bitterness on both sides.
And the million includes Egypt and Iran?
The million includes Egypt and Iran. The Jews were expelled outright from Egypt in 1956. Many had fled because in 45 and 48 there were massacres of Jews in Cairo and Alexandria. But in 56 they were expelled outright. As for Iran, Jews in Iran, oddly enough, constitute the largest Jewish community in the Middle East today. There are about 8,000. And they suffer grievously, but it's one community that stubbornly refuses to leave. Many of them have left, particularly since 1979, and they've settled in Los Angeles, in Israel, and in Great Neck, New York. Yeah, they're very often used as a kind of hostage community by the Iranian government, and falsely accused of espionage for Israel.
I think we may have time for one or two more questions.
Yes.
Along those lines, what I've always heard is the Palestinian camps that started, that the Arab countries around Israel refused to take them. And that's why they ended up in the camps where, when the camps started. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true to some extent. It really depends on the country. So the Palestinian refugees have fared the best in Jordan. In Jordan, they've been granted citizenship. They don't live in camps for the most part. They're, in many respects, indistinguishable from non-Palestinian Jordanians. They fared the worst in Lebanon. In Lebanon, there are about a dozen Palestinian refugee camps. They're slums, they're like the Brazilian favelas you may have seen. And the Lebanese government has refused to allow them not just citizenship, but even the right to work. So they do work, but they do so under the table, and that exposes them to mistreatment and exploitation. So the answer is it depends on the country. But for the most part, they do live in refugee camps still.
I think we have time for one more question.
Can you speak a little bit about West Bank and Gaza?
Sure.
As far as one thing that we hear as far as colonialism is concerned is not allowing Palestinians to make a living, to come through barriers. What can you say about that? I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, well, under the Oslo Accords, Israel withdrew from many Palestinian cities, most Palestinian cities in the West Bank and Gaza. But starting in 2000, with a second intifada, that was the Palestinian uprising, resulted in suicide bombings and terrorism in Israel. Things have changed. First of all, Israel built this is another problematic term, I say barrier instead of apartheid wall or security fence. Israel built a barrier, largely but not perfectly conforming to the 67 border. And Palestinians can't cross that border unless they have a work permit. But crossing into Israel is an arduous, time-consuming, distressing process that can involve waiting hours at a checkpoint. Freedom of movement of Palestinians in the West Bank is also impeded because of Israeli checkpoints. But the Israelis justify this, and they do have a case on security grounds. Now, whether Israelis should be in the West Bank is a different matter, and you can debate the ethics of that yourselves. But has it been inconvenient, if not detrimental to Palestinian life? Absolutely. But is there a security rationale for it? Absolutely. So there has to be a balance in between, or a two-state solution would resolve this, but that's not in prospect now.
Well, I feel like we could probably extend this for another 2 or 3 weeks with symposia, and obviously we've just scratched the surface, but this perspective on Jewish life in the 19th century, I think, has been a real eye-opener, and I really appreciate your talking about that, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah.
And I just wonder, for ongoing learning and stuff, is there particular resources that you would, do you have a favorite books, or like 3 favorite books, or any kind of, we can also do a follow-up to the community, but I think it would be great from, what do you recommend for continued learning?
Sure. Well, on the refugee crisis, I think the best, on the refugee crisis, I would say the best books are those written by Benny Morris. He's an Israeli historian who's disliked by both sides, so that tells you he's onto something. Yeah. And he was really the pioneer of making use of the declassified archival documents that were unsealed in the 1980s. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would also highly recommend the Center for Israel Education classes, lectures, writings. They're local, they're informative, and there's just a lot of great material that they have. So you can find them online very easily.
Okay, thank you.
Center for Israel Education.
Thank you, thank you so much for coming and sharing Shabbat with us and learning. And as you know, we know this topic is, we're never done on this topic and everything. So in that, hoping that you come away with more curiosity, always more questions, right? And so we move into the Mishaberach, and really the place that I want to start is the Mishaberach for all of the people who are involved in all of this, which is pretty much the whole world. And so like when we turn our attention to those who are in need of healing, I want to think of all of the peoples who are struggling over these lands. And may we all find healing. And I also want to lift up here to hear some names. Do you want to play while I'm doing this? Just like doing some tuning while I'm reading the names and listening to the names? Because it's a good list. Yeah, absolutely. So Ruben will provide the undercurrent of beauty while we're saying some names. But let us first hear the names that you want to lift up, and I'll do the old skim the room here. And if you have the names of folks you're praying for healing. Scott Epstein, Ali Sharman, Mark Podhorzer, Roseanne Glick, Patty Johnson, Victoria Isbister, John Isbister, Kara Pruitt, Bowen Harbuck, Anna Levy-Sprick, Ruth Canfer, Nell Mayer, Dory Perling, Nancy Roseblum, Sharon Bronstein, Melissa Sachs, Rabbi Zev Chaim Fair, Rick Tel Johan, Randy Foster, Ava Kotliar, Susan Birch, Sarah K. Black, Terry Egdahl, Richard Anzalone, Mildred Anzalone, Rachel Hahn, Margie Osheroff, Jean K. Black, Jackie Sherman, Lisa Tyler, Shirley Olafern, Ellen Mandel-Levine, Barbara Rubin, Kara Levine-Brenner, and we add Valerie Singer as well to that list. And so let us turn our attention and sing a healing prayer.
El Narifanala, El Narifanalo, El Narifanali, El Narifanalanu, El Narifanala, El Narifanalo, El Narifanali, El Narifanalanu, V'kol yoshvei tevel.
May all those who are in need of healing in body, mind, and spirit receive all the nourishment that they need.
We open our Siddurim to our very last page, where we recite the prayer for the end of hiding, a formative and cornerstone prayer at this shul, founded so many years ago by gay lesbian folks who felt like they had no home elsewhere. You should find it on the very back cover if you open your book. We read together. As LGBTQ Jews, we are aware of the loss of integrity we suffer due to the pressures of the larger society. We often feel forced into a dishonest presentation of ourselves to ourselves and others. The LGBTQ individuals who feel they must pretend to be something they are not, the Jews who feel they must be alienated from their tradition and community to win larger acceptance, both are victims of a theft of identity and integrity committed by the sexual, gender-identifying, or religious majority. Creator of the universe, we ask that our hiding draw to an end, that we no longer feel we have to pretend, to promise falsely, to renounce ourselves, and that our fullest creative expression as Jews and as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people be among the blessings so upon us. We're going to turn to the Mourner's Kaddish on page 131.
Elenu first.
Oh, excuse me.
In this, thinking about the talk that we just heard and the information, and constantly coming back to this, Elenu, it is up to us and to continue to do our work and to do our growth and learning. So we turn to page 121.
Alenu l'shabach ladon hakol,
Please rise.
latekedu lirot seher breshit, shavatan lanu et temet, et non atabetochenu, naknu korim, umishtakavim umodim, lifnei melech, malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu.
And now, if there are folks who are observing a yard site or want to lift up other names, let us bring to mind their names. The same thing, lift the names. Yeah. I don't have a list of the community names. Noah Johnson, Harriet Gold, of the yard site, I think.
Lifting up the name of Marianne Hart.
Marianne Hart, yeah.
Richard Adler and Nancy Mellinger.
Great. Yeah. Yolanda.
You'll find the Mourner's Kaddish on 131. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma
divra hurtei, be'amlik malhutei,
b'chayachon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, b'agala v'bizman kariv v'emru amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mivarak Le'olam Ulmei Olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudesha brechu le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru. Amen. May their memories be for a blessing and a comfort and for strength as we move forward. Unless there's a volunteer, you may be seated. Unless there's a volunteer, I'll just do the announcements, y'all. So welcome. Welcome, and welcome to our guests. So wonderful to have you here. Thank you to Lisa Barrios, who played the role of greeter tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonah, ably assisting us in the back there. Thank you, Ruben. Thank me, Mackenzie. Thank you, Dr. Scott Abramson. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. Today's police officer on police officer on duty is Sergeant Detective, what's the honorific? Sergeant? Is Corey Wright? Yeah. Well,
and thank you
officer. Thank you, officer.
Mr. Tondo, who's new here to CBH, who helped set up. I think he's new.
Newish, yeah. Yeah. And we also, Faith was here, our fabulous Oneg Maven, and we're grateful for tonight's Oneg sponsor. I don't know if there was one.
Kind of me partly.
You made falafel. Ruben made falafel. And Faith, who is gone, had did the Oneg setup. Okay, tomorrow, a deep breath for Shabbat Unplugged, 9 a.m. here. In-person chant on Wednesday, December 18th at 8:45. All are welcome. Hanukkah is just around the corner. We'll be celebrating here with lights, latkes, and love. And that is December 20th. Pizza and latkes, of course. 5:45, services at 6:30. Sign up online and bring your Hanukkah. We will not have in-person services here on Friday, December 27th, so enjoy Shabbat at home. We will be having services in the new secular year, Friday, January 3rd, led by Rebecca. There is learn to be part of the political process and learn some tips on making your voice heard with a workshop on how to influence legislators, which is January 5. What a great way to start the new year. In that way. And we don't have time, of course, to announce everything, so read your bet mail, look at the email, look at the website, talk to your neighbors, and we have another one from,
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say there were other Tikkun Olam opportunities in January. You can see them on the website. Briefly, they are January 19th, our 14th year with MedShare, and January 20th, our second annual MLK Mitzvah Marathon and potluck lunch.
Awesome.
Don't forget the lunch.
Yeah, and is that the one that got sent to be added?
Yeah.
Great. So let's sing a song before we do.
Say shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Thank you so very much.
Who would like to lead us in Kiddush?
Beautiful.
I'll never forget this wonderful Shabbat dinner we had at our house. We had a guest, and he held the glass. We said the Kiddush. He drank the whole glass. It was wonderful. He said, "Am I supposed to do that?" Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pori hagafen. Amen.
And we have a beautiful challah